Welcome to the Critical Media Studies Podcast. We're your hosts, Mike Rapici
and Barry Fall.
Good evening, Michael. How are you? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. I'm well, thank you. I'm looking forward to starting the new year off with a heavy dose of optimism and sunshine here.
And indeed, I think the times call for it.
Indeed.
And so we are going to be discussing a cherry book, or a book with a cherry title. And the book continues in the spirit of the cherry title. I don't think it's a sunny book, but the cherry title is "If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies." Why colons are always important. Why superhuman AI would kill us all. The book is co-written, co-authored by Eliezer, Yudkowsky, and Nate Soares. And we want to give a special critical media studies shout out to Irina, I think. Is that what we said?
I think so.
We were looking at Irina, who was sorry for if we're butchering the name, but we're trying to be correct. But we're certainly very grateful for any suggestions for content for critical media studies. This was a suggestion that came from a listener, and we're grateful for it, and we're appreciative of such interactions. And we have things to say about the Yudkowsky and Soares book that we on a topic that's near and dear to critical media studies in recent months. I think we had sort of pivoted away from AI, and then all of a sudden, like The Godfather, we are sort of pulled back in.
Like moths to the flame, Barry.
Like moths to the flame. We're worried about why and how superhuman AI will kill us all. Okay. So, Michael, unless you have I'm ready to give a précis of the argument, or allow Yudkowsky and Soares to give a précis of their argument or declare their thesis. I will voice it, but I'm ready to do that. But maybe you have
I think the only thing I think I would add to this is that not only are we looking at the introduction of the first chapter from the book, Mr. Yudkowsky also did a very good interview with Ezra Klein, which is easily available on YouTube. That I don't think there was anything new in that discussion that the book doesn't have, as he was really there discussing the book. But I think it's probably worth noting that part of what we're going to talk about here is informed by that discussion a little bit.
That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. And I will mention, I don't know if we'll have time to reference it, but even if I don't, I do want to say that there is a Times Literary Supplement. The book was published in September of last year. And there is a Times Literary Supplement review of the book by AI impresario. You can't be an impresario of AI. What do you say? Student pioneer, like Yudkowsky. I think he's a pioneer in artificial intelligence, by Gary Marcus, who's has a few very interesting books on Silicon Valley and AI and the culture of Silicon Valley. And I might make reference to that excellent review. And even if I don't, I would encourage listeners and anyone interested in the book to check it out. All right. Anything else? And you were mentioning the Klein podcast. Is this as usual? There's a name for it, right? Ezra Klein is there a name for the Klein podcast, or is it was he doing this under the auspices of the New York Times?
I believe so. It is, it's from the Ezra Klein Show.
Ezra Klein Show. Okay.
And the title of that interview, I just pulled it up. Excuse me. The title is "How Afraid of the AI Apocalypse Should We Be?" And it's the Ezra Klein Show. And that also obviously is, as we record here on January 7th, that was 2 months ago. So it's a recent discussion. Obviously, the book is recent as well.
Thank you for the clarification, Michael. I'll dig right in now. So I'm reading now I'm going to cherry pick a couple things or cull a couple passages. This is a very lucid, clearly written book. It's not an academic book, right? Even though there's hard science and mathematics behind it. But would you agree with me, Michael, that it's not necessarily written to be an academic book, even though there's obviously professional knowledge about
It's I was going to say that
math and
it's not an academic book. He's not working with theory in here really, but this is a difficult read, I imagine, if you're not familiar with AI, how AI
mm-hmm,
works, and because his concerns, I think to make sense of his concerns, you have to
mm-hmm.
have a basic understanding of what's going on. But no, I would not say this is an academic work at all.
Yeah. But I think your caution is well met and well said. But at any rate, they try very hard in their introduction to state their case clearly, and I'll read it. So, from the introduction, hard calls and easy calls. I'm reading now. We, Eliezer, Yudkowsky, and Nate Soares, also signed a letter that was, and you this might be in the memory and in the cognizance of our listeners. In 2023, hundreds of artificial intelligence scientists signed an open letter, basically arguing for the, sort of worrying about the untrammeled development of AI. Um, and this book articulates and maybe puts a fine point on this concern that many AI computing folk, many people who are doing substantial scientific research into artificial intelligence, it's trying to voice those concerns. Our concern is for what comes after, they write. Machine intelligence that is genuinely smart, smarter than any living human, smarter than humanity collectively. We are concerned about AI that surpasses the human ability to think and to generalize from experience and to solve puzzles, scientific puzzles, and invent new technologies, and to plan and strategize and plot and to reflect on and improve itself. We might call this AI like that artificial superintelligence. We might call AI like that artificial superintelligence, ASI, which is the subject of the book, once it exceeds every human at almost every mental task. AI isn't there yet, but it's getting there. And I'll just read a little bit more about it. More recently, as AI has begun to take off, we watch with concern as some of the newer people starting AI companies began talking about artificial superintelligence as a source of vast, wonderful powers, powers that they assumed they'd control. The main danger, according to many of these founders, was that the wrong people might have, quote unquote, ASI. They talked of the need to win a artificial intelligence arms race. We saw that the AI capabilities were growing very fast. And now we get to their most explicit statement of caution. It no longer seemed realistic to us. This is the impulse that kind of that spurred on the writers to write the book. At a certain point, quote, it no longer seemed realistic to us that humanity could engineer and research its way out of catastrophe. Not under conditions like these, not in time. And this passage that I'll read is in bold in print in the book. If any company or group, and this is the title, this also furnishes the title of the book. If any company or group anywhere on the planet builds an artificial superintelligence using anything remotely like current techniques, based on anything remotely like the present understanding of AI, then everyone, everywhere on Earth, planet Earth, capitalized, will die. And then the next paragraph isn't in bold, but they don't really pull back, right? We do not mean this statement is hyperbole. We are not exaggerating for effect. We think that that is the most direct extrapolation from the knowledge, evidence, and institutional conduct around artificial intelligence today. So that's kind of basically the argument.
Right.
And Michael, maybe you have an opening foray here.
Well, I think, as I think about this argument, I think it's important to sort of, I don't know that this is necessarily an opening foray, but here's a starting point. Um, this is a concern that we've seen before. There's two Hollywood examples of this that sort of bring me up, right? So the most obvious, uh, sort of Hollywood version of this is the Terminator, right? When Skynet goes online and decides it wants to kill everybody. And I don't think that that's their concern. I think he goes to great lengths to say that the problem isn't that AI will hate us or actively seek to destroy us. The other version of this that I think is maybe similar, but still not
Mm-hmm.
quite aligned with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is important because there's a couple. We're going to die, but he hasn't really told us how we're going to die yet, right?
Right, right.
Um, is
But he
the
does think it, they do think it's inevitable that we
Well, and
are
that's
going to die,
that's the
right?
point. That's one of my critiques about this. I don't. It's spooky. What he's talking about is certainly scary. It gets your attention. But I think about the scene in the Raiders of the Lost Ark at the end when the Nazis have gotten the Ark and they pull the top off, and it's just too much awesome power for anybody to manage. And
And
Indiana
literally the
Jones
face
and the
melts.
girl close their eyes and look away. And if you don't close your eyes and look away, in other words, if you don't shun it, it melts your face. And then
Yes.
that's the problem here, right? Like this is too much power. Um, I think I will start, and this could be starting at the end. Maybe we work backwards. I don't know. I apologize if I'm going to throw you a monkey wrench here. I think my concern with this is that he moves exceptionally quickly to an absolute catastrophe at the end where we all die. And I don't know that that's necessarily fair. So I want to start by saying I think
Mm-hmm.
his argument is good. I think it's convincing. It certainly got my attention. But um, I don't know. It seems the more I think about it, it seems a little much to me.
Well,
Where do
Michael,
you land?
I'm going to hold that. I'm going to hold off on that, and I'm also going to slow you down because I sense I know where you're going to say. I sense I know your objection to the argument, but before we go to any of those places, and
Yeah.
I definitely want you to talk about. I definitely want you to talk about your objection because I think it's our objection as well. You convince me. Your objection to the inevitability of superhuman artificial intelligence destroying mankind, humankind. So we're going to get there, and I want to hear how you articulate it. But I want to ask you, and I'll help you answer it. So this is not a hostile question. But in fact, it was just implicit in the very beginning through your formulation. I want to ask you this. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be immediate. The melting, the face
The
melt
face
will
melting.
not be as immediate as it was in Raiders of the Lost Ark. But here's my question for you, and I think you're going to have something really interesting to say on this. How do they see apocalypse happening? Okay, it's not going to be the malevolence of the Terminator.
Right.
It's not going to happen in the wink of an eye, the blink of an eye, like
The
it does at
awesome
the end.
overpowering
The
and
awesome
resultant face
overpowering,
melting.
the face melting power of artificial intelligence, which is tantamount to the Ark of the Covenant. It's not that. So, how do we get to a doomsday
Yeah.
scenario
So
for
I think the
Yudkowsky and
argument
Soares?
that I understand is that this is about, I think at its core, this is about dominance and control, right? And
Okay.
the argument that gets made is that humans did not ascend to the top, did not become the apex creature because we were the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the most anything. We were the smartest. And as a result of
In a
being,
general kind of way. In a
yes,
general kind of way
right.
is one of the
And
points they make in the
sort
interview.
of if you look at the sort of the odds, right? Like we're not well protected, we're soft and squishy, and we don't have terribly big teeth, and we don't run all that fast. We shouldn't have risen to the top, but it was our intelligence and our ability to
Mm-hmm.
fashion tools, to plan, to predict, to control that did it. And so I think at the core of their argument is this concern that we have. There's a couple of concerns, and I think they're all related, right?
Mm-hmm.
One, that we have created something that is unquestionably better at the things that put us on top of the food chain.
Mm-hmm.
It is smarter, it is more better able to predict and to organize and to strategize than we are. And that it will only continue to become more so in all of those ways.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first one. The second one, I think, is really an issue of control. How do you control this thing when you don't necessarily see? I think there's this sort of, what's the word I want to use for it? There is this arrogance, this sort of subject arrogance that we are at the center of all things. And the reality, and he talks about this a bit, is that, these AI don't speak English. They speak some sort of algorithmic mush of everything. And we don't really know how that works. The interesting thing in the Klein interview, he makes the argument, and I'm sure this is in the book, that these AI are grown, they're not built. And that the problem we have is that as they are trained on models and they become smarter, better able to predict, we're watching outputs, but we can't be 100% sure
Mm-hmm.
of how the outputs are actually reached. And that training these models is not as simple as giving it a directive and then getting that response, that there's a lot that goes into it on the order of billions of inputs, and that to train them to a particular end is a kind of a guessing game, is how I understand it, that we have to maybe feed it more information with it's sort of like steering a boat, it seems, right? Like you kind of want to direct it this way, or you kind of want to direct it that way in the hope of getting it to give you not just correct answers or helpful answers, but predictable answers. And in that regard, I think they're very concerned that we don't have control of this, and that because they are able to predict, they are able to self defend and mislead intentionally. So you've created something that has already, in certain ways, exceeded your grasp. And the concern isn't
At least
necessarily,
potentially, and in fact, inevitably, certainly so.
well, and I
Certainly so
think,
inevitably, right?
that's part of
That's the
that.
idea.
That's the idea right there. I
Mm-hmm.
think that
Mm-hmm.
if it's not already here, it is inevitable.
It's
But
inevitable that way.
part of the
Mm-hmm.
problem is we don't get to know when we've reached that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so your concern isn't so much that it's going to turn on you and start launching bombs or launching missiles and sending humanoid robots out to kill you, a la Terminator. I don't think that's the future that he or they envision. I think it's more a case of an indifference, or that humanity becomes unnecessary because we're slow, or we're competing for resources, or we don't align with whatever objectives the AIs come up with. It's not personal. I mean, that's there's
That's it. It's not
it's not
personal.
personal. It's business in a way, right? Like I'm an AI. I'm after this objective, and I'm looking for the most efficient way of getting there. And if humanity is an impediment to that efficiency, then we're gonna be factored out somehow. And the question, and this is something, Barry, I want to ask you about this. The question then is, how does that necessarily, and this could be a naive question, I don't know that I have an answer to this yet, though. how does that necessarily lead to certain doom?
Well, let me. I didn't know whether I would get a chance
Oh,
to
absolutely.
mention.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to try
No,
and
no,
talk
no,
over.
no, no, no. I was about to reference that. I mentioned a couple minutes ago the very helpful and insightful review by Gary Marcus of this book. And I wasn't sure I was going to get a chance to reference it, but your question leads me to it directly. His major objection, not to the book, which he thinks is insightful, and he thinks there are genuine concerns at the core, but he sharply critiques the notion of inevitability. In his review of If Anyone Builds It, Gary Marcus in the TLS resists kind of systematically, and on for a couple different reasons. He resists the notion of inevitability that Yudkowsky and Soares kind of build their argument on. And it's just basically, and he introduces Marcus introduces a nice metaphor in doing that. Or I think levels a really interesting critique. Uh, there is a kind of science fiction logic that Marcus says, um, and he doesn't mean this to be devastating, but I think this is kind of a devastating criticism, is that at certain points, their arguments become the logic of science fiction film or
Hmm.
science fiction dystopia. And obviously, if you're watching a Hollywood film with the Terminator, you're not going to have a film. You're not going to have a drama. You're not going to have a narrative if there isn't a kind of malevolent Arnold Schwarzenegger Terminator, right?
Fair. Yeah.
And Marcus basically feels that there are too often in the book, um, Yudkowsky and Soares are working with right premises, but they automatically run to the most dramatic conclusion from these premises. So that, therefore, if they're so, I'll put up, maybe this is a better way of explaining it. It's one thing to assume there might be a conflict between AI and humanity
Right.
as AI develops. It's quite another thing to say that that conflict is going to escalate immediately or eventually into a full scale annihilation, battle for domination over the earth. And here's another great point that Marcus makes. It's yet another thing to say that humans will always lose. They may, but yet Yudkowsky and Soares assume that not only will there be an inevitable battle for the fate of the earth between AI in the dramatic fashion of Hollywood. There
Hmm.
will be, a single-minded quest between the alien and humanity, and only one person can win, right? Only one entity, rather, can win. But there's also a kind of categorical refusal that Marcus recognizes in Yudkowsky and Soares' part. Categorical refusal to assume that humans have any creative agency at all in the battle. Like once you start engaging AI, it's going to whip your ass. That's it. Go home.
Well, to complicate that a bit, though, I think that, and I imagine that part of this is maybe for dramatic purposes. Part of this is also just because this spirals wildly otherwise. But, you know, one of the issues, and bear with me a second, this is a slightly circuitous route to get to the point, but one of the issues that they have is that it's not too late because it doesn't exist yet.
Mhm.
But the train has left the station and it is flying down the tracks,
Mhm.
right? And part of the reason that it's flying down the tracks is because there is extreme, I mean, profound financial reward for the group that gets this done
Absolutely.
first. And that the problem, and this is their concern, so sort of just to pick the argument apart a little bit, right,
Mhm.
is that the advantage that the first person there
Mhm.
gets
Mhm.
disincentivizes safety protocols,
Safety protocols and cautions, right?
disincentivizes caution.
Mhm.
And this is also being done by a certain group of people who I think are sometimes prone to being blinded to the
Mhm.
dangers of what they do.
Mhm.
And so when you put those two together, you have a real problem. But what's interesting about this is we have several competing groups actively and very aggressively competing for AI supremacy, right? What I wonder, Barry, is what happens when these trains start to reach their destinations and we have multiple competing AI. The argument that doesn't get brought up here and that you don't really hear about is what happens when, country A's AI is trying to make something happen and company B's AI is trying to make something happen. That's the other argument here is that it may not just be a binary relationship between humans
Humans in it.
and a
Wow, that's a
singular
great point. That's
artificial
a great
intelligence.
point.
What happens when all the artificial intelligences
That's a great point.
start? Because again, we're looking at this as if it, and I don't know, maybe this is just a lack of understanding on my part, but we're looking at this as if it's a singular thing.
They certainly think of it as a binary. It's superhuman artificial intelligence versus humanity. And you
But
bring up an interesting scenario that I don't think they bring up at
I
all,
don't think
right?
I've seen it, but it's a question that says, because the problem, right, at the core of this is you're going to give an artificial intelligence a task.
Mm-hmm.
And the concern is that not that it will complete its task, but that in completing its task, it might do so in a way that was unpredictable or that would have unintended consequences. And as learning machines, in asking it to do objective A, it might pick up other little skills along the way which you're unaware of, and that multiplies. Well, what happens when you put two or three different, sort of intelligences at competing tasks? And obviously part of the concern here, right, is that they're not going to all be aligned. That's the problem, is we're not aligned.
Right. Right.
Is does that create some sort of complication?
And well, I mean, I
And
think,
does this
yeah,
potentially work to our benefit? I mean, does this get us back to our
well,
friend
that's what I
Jonathan
was going to
Crary,
ask.
where the machine goes scorched earth on itself?
That's what I was going to ask. I mean, it sounds like Marcus doesn't make this argument, uh, this counter argument, but I do think your argument is kind of in his spirit, in that Marcus is trying to think of possible forces that would retard or decelerate the the escalation of AI or the domination of AI. And I think you just named one of them.
So we got two basic situations here, right? Like the first one is that Yudkowsky and Soares are right, and this is certain doom because the machine sees us as superfluous or being in the way. The second one, which we just talked about, is this idea where maybe that happens, or alternately, maybe we get a scenario where multiple AI are in competition with each other, and
And not
then
necessarily directly in competition with
right.
their human
And
creators,
right.
right?
And perhaps we're caught in the crosshairs there. We're collateral damage, but also perhaps they just, annihilate
Right.
each other in some way. And in that situation, we are, there's a really perverse scenario here where you get a lot of thinkers. Again, I mentioned Jonathan Crary, who get their way because we have gone scorched earth now. I mean, this is, one of the things that's interesting about this situation that I think is probably parallel to both arguments is this idea that in order for these things to run, and we've talked about this before, ecologically, there's a massive cost here. There's a finite amount of resources here. One of the
Absolutely.
things that I don't know that they
Absolutely.
brought up is this idea that in order to build this intelligence, we now are dealing with scarce fuel supplies to maintain it. I mean, there's the
Right.
possibility that that ends us that much sooner, but I think there's also the possibility that that becomes a plug of sorts. So we have two possible outcomes here, and I think you have
Well, I was going to throw this out there because this is I think a fairly controversial idea that Marcus has, and you and I haven't talked about it, and I'm interested to hear your response. Here's
Yeah.
another of his counter arguments. Um, uh, his counter argument is based out of his own expertise in superhuman and artificial intelligence, but it's very contrary. A very contrary reading of our current situation than Yudkowsky and Soares have, and I think it will be an interesting thing to end on. And I'm very interested, as I mentioned, to hear your take on Marcus's one of Marcus's counter arguments to the logic of inevitable destruction in the contest, or inevitable destruction of humankind in the contest between artificial intelligence and humanity. And it comes to this: Marcus has a very different reading of our moment and of our particular moment in the AI arms race that you were talking about in this fantastically well funded search for the ultimate superhuman intelligence.
Hmm.
He feels, unlike Yudkowsky and Soares, who very much feel that we're not there yet with AI. AI isn't superhuman intelligence, but it's going to get there.
And soon.
And okay, that's the part he doesn't agree with. He thinks it might get there, but as I mentioned, there are different scenarios that he feels might be in play when it gets there. But even beyond that, he he doesn't read the situation as we're a step away and we're working so hard, we're about to make a huge breakthrough. On the contrary, he reads, like I said, this is polemical. I'm interested,
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
is a provocative point, and he's not presenting it as a given fact, but it does seem to feel that there's strong evidence for his. Obviously, he feels there's evidence for his position, but his reading of the current situation with AI evolutions is that we're at a stalemate, and part of the problem is that we are so. Part of the problem is or part of his contrast rather, with Yudkowsky and Soares is he feels they invest too much faith in the power of language generated artificial intelligence. And he feels that, this language generated chat GPT-ish superhuman intelligence is about to take the plunge. He feels, on the contrary, that we're soon, people may be throwing effing billions and millions of dollars into this venture, but there is a limit, and we may have already reached it with language generated superhuman intelligence. And so he feels that one of the reasons why he's not alarmed by Yudkowsky and Soares is he feels they're way too invested in chat GPT like
Right.
language
Right.
generated artificial intelligence, and actually far from about to accelerate and about to give us the great breakthrough that we've all been waiting for, and maybe eventually triggering the end of humanity. He feels, man, we're just throwing money at stuff, and
You know,
it's not
there's
clear that anything is going to happen soon.
there's a funny there's a
So nobody knows in a
nobody
different way.
knows.
Nobody
Yes.
knows.
So it's funny because there's a different version of the same thing here that I was listening the other day to a podcast where there were some tech guys who were interviewing a doctor about the usefulness of AI in medicine and what's really happening. And they were asking him, whether he thought this would ultimately be a boon to the medical community or whether it would have some unintended problems. And the doctor, and I don't remember his name. If I can find it, I'll certainly link to it. But he had said, the reality is that it's still a very long way off. And he said that the problem that he saw with the AI as it is now is that it's far too narrow. And that what makes medicine work is the ability to think broadly. And that was quite some time and very, very expensive to get
And
to.
very, very expensive.
His
Getting to
response,
your point about ecological
right.
impediments
His
to,
response was interesting, though. He said, and this is, again, here's sunshine for New Year, New Year. He said that he thought that it was probably infinitely more likely that we all nuked each other before that became a problem. And then he got talking, and this was what was interesting. He's like, the truth of the matter is that you can query these AI and use these AI to talk about how to combat this disease or how to scan for this or how to do that. He said, but they've also run tests where you they're talking about like the problems with poisons and creating poisons and things. And he said the problem with that is that you have to ingest a poison. And so that's actually not the scariest thing. He was looking at this, and I'm going somewhere with this, I think, from a perspective of bioterrorism, where you can now manufacture things that live inside hosts completely unaware that they're there, that are, you can trigger to only attack certain genetic makeups or mark, like
Mhm.
that was the much scarier version of this. And so what you see there is not that AI is going to kill us. It's that you're going to have malevolent actors who are going to leverage
Human
AI,
actors.
human
Yeah,
actors who are going to
malevolent human.
leverage AI. And so this to me now becomes an issue. It's like almost we're headed towards some sort of weird Cold War arms race
Right.
where now the name of the game become, there's still this race to wherever, and now you get issues of, who's sabotaging whose AI, what sort of corporate sabotage
Right.
and
Right.
bad behavior do
A
you
Cold
get?
War scenario, a neo Cold War
Yeah,
scenario,
and
right?
that to me, honestly, is not comforting. It's not like, oh, let's do this.
No, it's
But
not Yeah.
it takes some of the doomsday out of it, and it places a measure of human control. Now, again, I am not sitting here saying that I trust this or that this is good for anybody. But I think that what's scary about the idea of the AI apocalypse is that humans have been replaced with something else that doesn't have an emotional component, that doesn't
Hmm.
have
Hmm.
that is so hyper rational.
That it's not it empathy is impossible,
And it's not even necessarily about empathy. It's that it doesn't
or even
value
understanding. Yeah,
anything.
understanding. Right, right,
And so
right.
this idea,
Comprehension.
but also that cannot be matched. And so this
Hmm.
idea, and then God, we got to a weird place here where I'm sitting here telling you a Cold War scenario is actually a comfort, but it puts human it puts the human and human desire and will back into the front. And it also necessarily, I think, imposes a series of checks and balances, or at least checks.
And I think importantly, I agree with you. Uh, it is a weird thing that we're thinking of a neo Cold War espionage scenario, geopolitical scenario is the good news in all this. But on the other hand, Yudkowsky and Soares bring it on themselves with this argument about inevitability and this automatic, unavoidable chain of events, so that one looks at any kind of introduction of contingency into this schema of the future, it seems brighter than the future they postulate. So I don't know. I think that's the way to end it, Michael. I think that's where we have this for, and in fact, maybe it's perfect for the new year. Um, the best we could hope for is a neo Cold War espionage, or return to neo Cold War espionage utilizing AI. How about that?
Man, 26 is going to be something special.
It's going to be a year. It's going to be a year.
Yeah, I want to say just one thing. I don't take what they're saying lightly, and I don't necessarily think that it is across the board wrong.
No,
Um,
no, no, I don't either.
I think that some of the conclusions And maybe it's entirely possible that this is a misread on or a misunderstanding on my part. I'm not discounting that at all. But I think that some of the conclusions are overly linear and
Yeah, linear.
rigid.
Yeah, causal cause effect relationship, and it's really linear, unilinear,
Um,
right? Direct
right.
causal relationship.
Yeah. But it's an interesting and very uncomfortable discussion.
Well, yeah, how about I ends? I like your point about. I like that you turned at the end to a defense of the book, and I'm going to also, or a compliment to the book, and I'm going to end with a compliment too, if I may. And it kind of is based on something you mentioned a couple minutes ago when you were describing the current situation, the current arms race. I mean, we do have a kind of arms race,
Oh,
right?
without question.
Right. We do have a current arms race in the search race toward the development of superhuman intelligence, and it is about finance capitalism. It is about global capitalism, and about profiteering and things like this. And this is my compliment to the book. Um, I think the concern, and you were also I'm just building on a couple things you said a little bit earlier, Michael. You also mentioned um, the tendency of AI developers to, well, first off, there's a financial imperative or incentive to not be cautious, right? And that can hit at the heart of scientific development, right? You get so into the logic of scientific development that you throw caution away, especially if there's a financial incentive for you to throw caution away.
We saw
And yeah,
we saw this in Spider-Man.
thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
did see it in the MCU. I'm very glad you mentioned that. And my final point, Yudkowsky and Soares see it in our current moment, and they're afraid of it.
Yes.
And I think this is my compliment to the book. I do think they're writing with a sense of urgency because they feel that we are in a potentially catastrophic situation. And I would agree with that. I'd agree.
Yeah. I think that's a good spot to end. Well,
Well, thank
Barry,
you again, Michael.
yes, this was in
This is cheerful
this was
and
cheerful and
happy.
uplifting. It's good to see you, and
Good to see you.
happy New Year to you and all of you listening. And thank you. And we will return next time with something that might be sunnier.
And thanks again to Irina for recommending this book to us.
Absolutely. All right, Barry. Take care.
Bye bye.
Thanks for listening to the Critical Media Studies podcast. To find out more about the show, check out our webpage at criticalmediastudiespodcast.com.